are local, but we're covering a national story. Everybody's covering CPAC right now. It's CPAC 2020 in National Harbor, which is our backyard. It's our local story. And media is here from all over the country and all over the world covering today's speech from Vice President Pence and certainly the big finale, which will be President Trump's speech coming up this Saturday. Right now, as we like to talk about to spokespeople, we like to talk about to politicians. We also like to talk to thought leaders and people who can answer a lot of good policy questions for us from a conservative perspective. And to that end, we're with Dale Wilcox. He's the executive director of the Immigration Reform Law Institute. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of questions about our immigration law. So, Dale, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, first, let's just get to the root of it, because I think I spend so much time, certainly here in Washington, D.C. on WMAL, talking about sanctuary policies and how it is victimizing people in our communities, how politicians are aiding and abetting criminals and not cooperating with federal law, which is their duty. How is this allowed to happen, and what can we do to stop it?
Well, sadly, these states and cities have taken it upon themselves to thumb their noses at the federal government and say we're not going to cooperate. The only way that we can affect change, I know you've been involved in some of this, is protest, elections, and the courts. And thankfully, we actually had a victory yesterday in the Second Circuit, where the Trump administration had stated we're cutting off funds to sanctuary jurisdictions, those who won't cooperate with us. And those jurisdictions sued the federal government and said, you can't cut off the funds just because we won't help you. And the Second Circuit rightly decided yesterday, yes, the federal government can.
Yes, and they did it unanimously. Now, those were discretionary funds, so by definition, by law, the Attorney General, the Justice Department had discretion about who would get that money or not. That was, written into the law. There's a whole lot of other money that Congress earmarks that the administration can't do that with, right? Or that's still being challenged.
Yeah, you're correct. Congress has to decide. They have to build in that discretion. So sadly, these jurisdictions are getting funds that they shouldn't get because they're not cooperating. The federal government has complete and total power over immigration. The Constitution sets that up. These jurisdictions do not have the right to ignore federal immigration authorities, but they're doing it, and until they're challenged, and thankfully the Trump administration has been brave enough to institute policies that are in favor of Americans and the safety and security of our communities.
We talk about these stories, and it's all very much in grand terms and federal laws and jurisdictions and all of that stuff, but this affects real human beings. And I know you are taking up, or you focus on the case of a local story right here. We have talked to the surviving widow and mother of the two victims of this terrible murder. I think it's murder, even if the law doesn't see it that way at this point, on I-270 right here in Montgomery County. This has to do with, and forgive me, I'm just reading the names here, FBI Special Agent Carlos Wolf and Deputy State Fire Marshal Sander Cohen. Can you tell me a little bit about this case and why this is a great example of why these sanctuary laws are horrific?
Sure. Montgomery County has had a sanctuary law for quite some time, and this particular illegal alien that struck and killed these two individuals had been living in the country since 2009 unlawfully, was picked up in 2015 by Montgomery County on suspicion of committing some criminal activity, and ICE issued a detainer request asking the jurisdiction, hold him for 48 hours. We're coming to get this guy and deport him out of the country. Montgomery County refused, pursuant to their sanctuary policy. So they released him in 2015. He goes out in 2017, driving negligently, kills these two individuals. But the story doesn't...
The two individuals were on the shoulder because one of the guy's car broke down. The other guy, Good Samaritan, stops to help him with his broken down car. And they both get killed by this illegal immigrant who was on the verge of deportation because he had already been arrested.
Correct. The story doesn't stop there, though. In September of last year, this guy was picked up again for negligent driving and leaving the scene of an accident. Still driving. What is wrong with Montgomery County?
But you also talk in your documentation here, this is Dale Wilcox, he's Executive Director and General Counsel for Immigration Reform Law Institute, about this organization. We've talked about them a lot, and they seem rather mysterious, called Casa de Maryland. And they're very much involved in these policies and also very much involved in aiding and abetting these criminals.
I believe so. They are an anti-borders organization, and they actually, from our understanding, posted the bail for this individual and assisted in his legal defense.
So so now that's where my question comes in. They have now, if it's true that they posted the bail for this guy and assisted, can the surviving widow sue them and say you're helping this guy? You've kept him in this country to defy our laws so that he could eventually end up killing my husband.
Yeah, lawsuits like that have been tried, but they're not successful. Courts have found that you can't be held responsible for the third-party criminal acts of someone else.
What does harboring a criminal mean anymore then, and giving aid and shelter to a criminal if it doesn't mean that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's very frustrating. And they're also very politically involved, too. I mean,
yes.
Casa de Maryland, they make political donations to every person in government in Montgomery County who enact these laws, right?
Yeah, and they were very involved during the Obama years with the administration in setting policy, and they had access. Thankfully, under the Trump administration, that's changed a bit.
Right. They don't have access anymore, but they do at the local level. That's why we keep talking about it. Protest, the courts, and elections.
Exactly.
That's what we have.
That's what you can do.
And that's what we'll keep doing. Dale Wilcox, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. It's the Immigration Reform Law Institute. It's IRLI.org if you want to help them out. You should. They're fighting the fight.